Commander Zartek floated in the observation deck of the Galactic Alliance warship, his tentacles curled tight with worry. Through the massive viewport, he watched the human fleet prepare for battle. The sight made his 3 hearts beat out of rhythm. The humans moved their ships differently from every other species in the galaxy. Where most civilizations arranged their vessels in perfect geometric patterns, the human ships scattered like wild beasts ready to pounce. Their flagship, a massive gray behemoth they called Thunderstrike, sat at the center of their formation, weapons bristling from every surface. "Are they insane?" whispered Subcommander Valora, her feathers standing on end. "The Devourers outnumber them 5-1. Zartek had wondered the same thing when the humans volunteered to lead the assault. The Devourers had consumed 3-star systems already, their biomechanical ships eating through planets like acid through paper. Every species in the Galactic Alliance had tried to stop them. Every species had failed. But the humans had smiled when they heard the odds. Actually smiled. "Sir, incoming transmission from the human admiral," the communications officer announced, her voice trembling. The hologram of Admiral Sarah Chun appeared on the bridge. Unlike other species' military leaders, she wore no elaborate decorations or symbols of rank. Just a simple gray uniform with a small pin showing Earth's blue sphere. Her dark eyes held something Zartek had never seen in any other commander facing certain death: excitement. "Commander Zartek," she said, nodding respectfully, "I wanted to thank you for allowing us to take point on this operation." "Admiral Chun," Zartek replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Are you certain about this strategy? The Devourer's hive mind makes them nearly impossible, Chen interrupted with a grin. "That's the key word, Commander. We humans have a saying. Nearly impossible just means nobody's tried hard enough yet. Velorais se feders rafold in confusion. But your casualties will be acceptable," Chun said simply, "if we win." The bridge fell silent. In the Alliance, preserving life was the highest priority. Battles were fought with careful calculation, minimal risk, tactical withdrawals when the odds turned bad. But humans calculated differently. "Admiral," Zartek said slowly, "you do understand that even if you succeed, most of your ships won't survive?" Chen's expression softened slightly. "Every human on these ships volunteered, Commander. They know the odds. They chose to be here." She paused, looking at something off-screen. "We've all lost someone to the Devourers. Every single one of us. This isn't about survival anymore. It's about making sure no one else has to lose what we've lost." The tactical display suddenly lit up with warnings. The Devourers had arrived. Their ships poured out of hyperspace like a plague of metal insects, each one a writhing mass of tentacles and weapons guided by a single collective consciousness. The sight had made entire fleets flee in previous encounters. The human ships didn't flee. They accelerated. All Alliance vessels. "This is Admiral Chun." The human's voice rang across the fleet-wide channel. "Stay back and watch your sensors. You're about to see why Earth's children are so good at war." Zartek watched in horror and fascination as the human fleet charged straight at the enemy. No elegant maneuvers. No complex formations, just raw, purposeful aggression that defied every military doctrine the Alliance had developed over millennia. The first human ship to reach the Devourers was a small corvette called Remember Phoenix. It plowed into the enemy formation at full speed, its engines overloading. The explosion tore through 3 Devourer vessels, creating a gap in their perfect synchronized movement. By the 7 suns, Velora gasped. They're using their own ships as weapons. But that was just the beginning. The human fighters launched from their carriers in waves, piloted by beings who seemed to have no concept of self-preservation. They flew between the massive Devourer ships, too small and fast for the hive mind to track effectively. Where Alliance fighters would have pulled back after their first attack run, the humans pressed closer, dancing on the edge of death with every maneuver. Zartek's tactical display showed something unprecedented. The Devourer hive mind, which had adapted to every strategy, every weapon, every tactic the Alliance had tried, was struggling. The humans weren't following any logical pattern. Their attacks were chaos incarnate, each ship and fighter acting independently, yet somehow working toward a common goal. "Sir," his tactical officer called out, "the Devourer's formation is breaking down. Their hive mind can't predict what the humans will do next because the humans themselves don't know what they're going to do until they do it." A massive explosion lit up the viewport as the human cruiser Last Stand rammed into the Devourer command node. The ship's captain broadcast his final words across all channels. "For Earth, for everyone who couldn't fight back." The emotional rawness in that dying voice made Zartek's tentacles tremble. He'd seen 1,000 battles, but never anything like this. The humans weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting with their souls on fire. More human ships fell. The destroyer, Never Forget, overloaded its reactor core and detonated in the middle of a devourer swarm. The frigate Children's Hope used its own hull as a shield to protect a damaged Alliance medical vessel that had strayed too close to the battle. Each loss seemed to make the surviving humans fight harder, angrier, more unpredictably. "Commander," Velora said, her voice barely a whisper, "look at the Devourer movements. They're retreating." She was right. For the first time in recorded history, the Devourer hive mind was pulling back. The perfect predator that had consumed entire civilizations was fleeing from a species that had only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last century. But the humans didn't let them escape. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the chaos. "All ships, pursuit pattern Alpha. Don't let a single one get away." "Admiral," Zartek transmitted urgently, "you've won. Let them retreat. Preserve your remaining forces." Chen's hologram appeared again. Blood ran down her face from a cut on her forehead, and the bridge behind her sparked with damage. But her eyes burned with an intensity that made Zartek step back. "With respect, Commander, we haven't won yet. We just made them blink. If we let them run now, they'll adapt, come back stronger. This ends today." The pursuit was even more brutal than the initial engagement. Human ships pushed past their safety limits, engines burning out, life support failing, crews operating in conditions that would have made any other species surrender. But they kept fighting, kept pushing, kept dying to ensure not a single devourer escaped. Zartek watched a human pilot, his fighter damaged beyond repair, use his last moments to broadcast a message. "Mom, Dad, I kept my promise. They won't hurt anyone else." The pilot's fighter exploded against the devourer's ship's hull, taking the enemy with him. By the time it was over, space was littered with debris from both fleets. The devourers were gone, not just defeated, but obliterated. The humans had lost 60% of their ships, casualties that would have been considered a catastrophic defeat by Alliance standards. But the surviving human ships weren't mourning. They were singing. Across every communication channel, human voices rose in something they called a battle hymn. The words were in their ancient languages, but the universal translator conveyed the meaning. Songs of defiance, of sacrifice, of promises kept to the dead. Admiral Chen's damaged flagship limped toward the Alliance formation. Her hologram appeared one more time on Zartek's bridge. Half her bridge crew were wounded or dead, but those still standing held their heads high. "Commander Zartek," she said formally, "the Devourer threat has been eliminated. The shipping lanes are clear. Mission accomplished." "Admiral," Zartek said, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't quite identify. "Your losses were worth it," Chen finished. "Every single life. Because tomorrow, children on 100 worlds will wake up safe. That's all that matters." She cut the transmission, and the human fleet began collecting their dead. They treated each recovered body with a reverence that made Zartek's hearts ache. These weren't just casualties to them. Each one had been someone's child, parent, lover, friend. Each loss was personal. "Sir," Velora said quietly, "I think I understand now why the galaxy fears them." Zartek nodded slowly. "It's not their weapons or their ships. It's this." He gestured at the viewport. "They're willing to burn themselves to ashes if it means protecting others. They turn grief into fury, love into violence, hope into sacrifice. What kind of enemy could stand against a species that weaponizes its own humanity?" The Alliance had always wondered why such a young species had survived in a galaxy full of older, more advanced civilizations. Now Zartek knew. Humans didn't survive because they were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. They survived because when faced with a choice between their own lives and protecting others, they chose others. Every time. And that terrified him more than any devourer ever could. The memorial service took place 3 days after the battle. Commander Zartek had attended thousands of military ceremonies across the galaxy, but nothing had prepared him for how humans honored their dead. The Alliance Hall on Station Prime was transformed. Where most species preferred quiet, dignified remembrance, the humans had brought color, sound, and raw emotion. Pictures of the fallen covered every wall, not official military portraits, but images of them laughing, playing with pets, holding children, living the lives they died to protect. Admiral Chun stood at the podium, her dress uniform bearing new scars from the battle. Behind her, representatives from every human ship that had fought stood in formation. Some were missing limbs. Others bore burns that their medical technology hadn't yet healed. But every single one had insisted on attending. "We gather today," Chun began, her voice carrying across the packed hall. "Not to mourn, but to celebrate. Each person we lost chose to be in that battle." They looked death in the eye and said, "If not me, then who?" Zartek noticed something that made his tentacles curl with confusion. The humans weren't just crying, they were laughing too. As names were read, survivors shared stories that brought both tears and smiles. They spoke of pranks played in the mess hall, of fears conquered together, of small kindnesses that now seemed enormous. A young pilot, barely out of what humans called teenage years, stepped forward. His left arm was gone, replaced by a mechanical substitute. "Lieutenant Maria Santos," he said, voice cracking. "She taught me everything. How to fly, how to fight, but mostly how to remember what we're fighting for." He pulled out a small hologram projector. 3 days before the battle, she got a message from her daughter's school. Little Sophia had won the science fair. Maria was so proud, she showed everyone on the ship. The hologram displayed a small human child holding a trophy, grinning with gaps in her teeth. The pilot continued. Maria's last words were, "Make sure Sophia knows I saw her win." The mix of grief and pride in the room was overwhelming. Zartek had seen many species mourn, but humans mourned differently. They didn't hide from the pain. They embraced it, shared it, transformed it into something that somehow honored the dead while strengthening the living. Subcommander Valora, who had accompanied him, whispered, "I don't understand. How can they smile while speaking of the dead?" An old human woman sitting nearby overheard. She turned, her eyes red with tears but kind. "Because that's how they'd want to be remembered, dear. Not as corpses in space, but as they lived. My grandson Tommy died, ramming the last stand into that command node. You know what he said in his last message? Tell Grandma I finally did something worth her stories." She smiled through her tears. "I've been telling him stories about his grandfather, who died protecting our colony from pirates 40 years ago. Tommy always felt he had to live up to that." Her voice broke slightly. "Stupid brave boy. He did." As the ceremony continued, more stories emerged. The crew of Remember Phoenix had voted unanimously to make their suicide run, with the captain offering to do it alone and being told by his crew they'd mutiny if he tried. The fighter pilots had drawn lots for the most dangerous missions, with arguments breaking out over who got to take the biggest risks. But what struck Zartek most was how they spoke of the future. Each eulogy ended not with final words, but with promises. Promises to live the lives the fallen had died to protect. Promises to be worthy of the sacrifice. Promises to remember not just how they died, but why. When the formal ceremony ended, the humans did something that shocked the Alliance observers. They threw a party. Not a restrained gathering, but a full celebration with music, food, and stories that grew wilder with each telling. "This is how we honor them," Admiral Chan explained to Zartek, offering him a glass of something humans called whiskey. "We live, loudly, fully, completely, because they can't." Zartek found himself in conversation with Captain Marcus Webb, one of the fighter squadron leaders. The man had lost half his pilots, but seemed determined to ensure everyone knew their names and their stories. You have to understand, Webb said, slightly slurring after several drinks. We grow up on these stories. Every human child learns about those who stood when standing seemed impossible. Thermopylae, Rorke's Drift, the Alamo, the Battle of Britain, the Mars colony defense. He took another sip. We're raised knowing that sometimes someone has to be the one who doesn't come home so everyone else can. It's not that we want to die. God, no. But we're ready to, if that's what it takes. But how? Velora asked, genuinely puzzled. How do you overcome the survival instinct? Webb laughed, but it wasn't entirely happy. We don't overcome it. We just redirect it. See, humans are pack animals at heart. Our survival instinct extends to our pack. And after we joined the galactic community, our pack got a lot bigger. He gestured around the room, where humans are now teaching Alliance members their morning songs. Every species we've met, every world we visited, they became part of our pack. When the Devourers hit those colonies, it wasn't abstract to us. We saw ourselves, our children, our parents, our friends. The party continued deep into the station's night cycle. Zartek watched humans who had been mortal enemies of each other just a century ago unite in grief and determination. Former soldiers from opposing nations shared drinks, their old conflicts forgotten in the face of a greater threat defeated. Near the end of the gathering, Zartek found himself alone with Admiral Chun on an observation deck. Earth hung in the distance, a blue jewel that seemed impossibly fragile. My great-grandmother lived through Earth's darkest period, Chun said quietly. When we nearly destroyed ourselves with wars and climate change and hatred, she used to tell me that humans are at their absolute worst when they're afraid and their absolute best when someone else is afraid. She turned to face him. The Devourers made a mistake. They didn't just threaten us. They threatened everyone. And there's nothing more dangerous than a human protecting someone else. Your species confuses me, Zartek admitted. You have such capacity for destruction, yet you use it to protect. You embrace death, yet you celebrate life. You're individuals, yet you die for the collective. Shin smiled sadly. Welcome to the human paradox, Commander. We're walking contradictions held together by stubbornness and love. A young ensign approached, saluting sharply. Admiral, we've received responses from Earth and all the colonies. Volunteer rates for the fleet have increased by 400% since news of the battle spread. Chun nodded, unsurprised. Of course they have. Every human who heard about what happened here is asking themselves the same question. If not me, then who? As a memorial gathering finally wound down, Zartek noticed something that would stay with him forever. The humans hadn't just honored their dead. They'd transformed grief into purpose. Every tear shed was accompanied by a promise. Every moment of sadness balanced with determination. The next morning, as Alliance species returned to their ships, they carried something new with them. The humans had shared more than their grief. They'd shared their perspective. Zartek heard his own crew members speaking differently, standing straighter, looking at the stars with new eyes. Sir, his security chief reported, we've had 17 crew members request transfer to human ships for cross-training. Similar reports came from across the Alliance fleet. The battle had shown the galaxy human military might, but the memorial had shown them something far more powerful, the human heart. In her final speech before the fleets departed, Admiral Chun stood before the assembled representatives of 100 worlds. The Devourers thought they were apex predators, she said. They were wrong. The apex predator isn't the one with the biggest teeth or the strongest armor. It's the one willing to bare its throat to save its pack. It's the one that turns love into strength, fear into fury, and sacrifice into victory. She paused, looking at each species delegation. They thought they were hunting prey. Instead, they woke something that had been sleeping since we left our caves and looked up at the stars. They reminded us that we're not just humans anymore. We're humanity, and humanity protects its own. The fleets dispersed back to their homeworlds, but something fundamental had changed. The galaxy had witnessed humans in battle and understood why they were feared. But more importantly, they'd seen humans grieve and understood why they were loved. As Zartek's ship entered hyperspace, he found himself looking back at the battle recordings. But now he saw them differently. Each desperate charge, each impossible maneuver, each sacrifice wasn't about destruction. It was about love. Love transformed into its most violent and protective form. The galaxy would never be the same. The humans had shown everyone that sometimes the price of peace is the willingness to wage war. That sometimes the cost of life is death. That sometimes the greatest victory is ensuring someone else survives to see tomorrow. And across 1,000 worlds, other species began to ask themselves the question that defined humanity. If not me, then who? 10 years had passed since the Battle of the Void, as historians now called it. Commander Zartek, promoted to Fleet Admiral, stood in the Grand Assembly of the Galactic Alliance. The hall buzzed with tension as representatives from every member species gathered for an emergency session. The Kregan Empire had issued an ultimatum: surrender half the Alliance's resource worlds or face annihilation. The Kregans were ancient, powerful, and had never lost a war in their 3,000-year history. Their technology surpassed anything the Alliance possessed, and their warrior culture made them seemingly invincible. But something had changed in the galaxy since the human victory over the Devourers. As the Kregan ambassador finished delivering their demands, a figure stood up in the Earth delegation section. It wasn't Admiral Chun, who had retired to spend time with her family. Instead, a young man named David Park, recently elected as Earth's military representative, slowly walked to the speaker's podium. He moved with the careful deliberation humans showed when they were controlling deep anger. Ambassador Krax, Park said, his voice calm but carrying across the hall. I want to make sure I understand correctly. You're threatening to attack civilian populations if we don't comply. The Kregan, a massive reptilian creature with scales that could deflect plasma fire, laughed. The weak exist to serve the strong. This is the way of nature. Your species learned to fight, yes, but you only defeated the Devourers through lucky chaos. You cannot stand against Kregan discipline. Park nodded slowly. I see. And there's no room for negotiation. Surrender or die. Those are your options. A long silence filled the hall. Then, Park did something that shocked everyone. He smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. Zartek had learned to recognize this particular human expression. It was the smile humans wore when they'd made a decision that would cost them everything. Ambassador, before you leave, I'd like you to meet someone. Park touched his communicator. Sarah, could you come in, please? A small human girl, perhaps 10 years old, walked into the hall. She wore a simple dress and carried a stuffed animal. Her eyes were wide as she looked at all the alien species, but she showed no fear. This is Sarah Santos, Park said. Her mother was Lieutenant Maria Santos, who died at the Battle of the Void. Sarah, this is Ambassador Krax. He wants to hurt people like your mom protected. The girl looked up at the massive Kregan, studying him with that unnerving directness human children possessed. My mom said bullies are just scared people who pretend to be strong, she said clearly. Are you scared, Mr. Krax? The Kregan ambassador recoiled, as if struck. Several species made sounds of shock at the child's boldness. Park placed a protective hand on Sarah's shoulder. Thank you, Sarah. Go back to your guardian now. As the girl left, Park turned back to Krax. That child is why you're going to lose. You threaten us with children? Krax snarled. No, Park replied. I'm explaining something you don't understand. Every human ship that will face you will have her picture in it, and pictures of millions like her. Children whose parents died to keep them safe, who now look to us to do the same. He paused, looking around the assembly. You think our victory over the Devourers was luck? Let me tell you what's happened in the 10 years since. Every human child now grows up knowing that sometimes monsters are real, but they also grow up knowing that monsters can be beaten. Park activated a hologram showing human fleet positions. The numbers made several species gasp. In 10 years, humanity had increased their military forces by a factor of 20. We didn't build these ships to conquer, Park continued. We built them because we made a promise. Never again. Never again will we watch helplessly while innocents suffer. Never again will we let fear of casualties keep us from doing what's right. Your ships are nothing compared to ours, Cracks dismissed. Maybe, Park agreed. But let me tell you something else that's happened. Commander Zartek, would you please share the Alliance military exchange statistics? Zartek stood, his tentacles straight with pride. In the past 10 years, over 3 million Alliance citizens have completed training programs with human forces. Not in technology or tactics, in mindset, in learning that some things are worth dying for. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The Villani ambassador stood next. The Villani Republic stand with Earth. Our children sleep safely because humans bled for them. One by one, other species stood. The Quaxi, the Threni, the Baltori. Even the traditionally pacifist Selnari rose to their feet. Each had been touched by human sacrifice, human protection, human willingness to be the shield between darkness and light. Krax looked around in disbelief. You would all die for these mad apes. No, the ancient Yothri ambassador spoke, her crystalline form chiming with each word. We would live for what they showed us. That strength without mercy is just brutality. That power without purpose is meaningless. That the greatest victory is not conquest, but protection. Park stepped forward. Ambassador Krax, here's what's going to happen. You're going to return to your empire. You're going to tell them that if they attack any Alliance world, they won't just face our fleets. They'll face humans. And we don't fight to conquer. We fight to end threats. Permanently. He leaned closer. We studied your history. Every war you've won, you've allowed the enemy to surrender, to be absorbed into your empire. We won't give you that option. If you force this fight, we will end the Kregan Empire. Not conquer it. End it. Your culture, your history, your entire civilization will cease to exist. We'll burn every ship, destroy every weapon, and ensure you never threaten anyone again. And then, his voice dropped lower, we'll adopt every Kregan orphan and raise them to be protectors instead of conquerors. Your own children will grow up, human and all, but blood, defending the galaxy from others like what you are now. The hall was deathly silent. The humans' words weren't a threat, they were a promise. And everyone who had seen the Battle of the Void knew humans kept their promises. Krax's scales flickered, a sign of deep distress. You wouldn't. The casualties would be acceptable. Park cut him off. If it means no one else ever faces your threats again. That's the difference between us, Ambassador. You fight because you enjoy power. We fight because someone has to stand between the darkness and the light. And we've gotten very, very good at standing. The human delegation began to sing. Quietly at first, then louder. It was the same battle hymn from 10 years ago, but now voices from a dozen species joined in. The words were different, adapted to each culture, but the meaning was the same. We stand together. We protect each other. We remember the fallen by living for the future. Krax fled the assembly hall, his warrior's pride shattered by something he couldn't understand. Beings willing to die not for glory or conquest, but for others. 3 days later, the Kregan Empire withdrew their ultimatum. Intelligence reports suggested massive internal upheaval as younger Kregans questioned their culture of conquest after learning about human sacrifice. The empire that had never lost a war had been defeated without a single shot fired. Admiral Chun, watching from retirement, sent a single message to Park. Well done. You showed them the truth. Humans don't win wars because we're the strongest. We win because we're willing to lose everything to protect what matters. In the following months, something unprecedented happened. The Kregan Empire requested cultural exchange programs with Earth. Young Kregans wanted to understand this concept of protective strength. Within a generation, the galaxy's most feared conquerors had transformed into some of its most dedicated defenders. Zartek, now old by his species standards, often returned to that memorial where he'd first understood humanity. A new section had been added, not for the dead but for the living. Pictures and stories of beings from every species who had learned the human way, who had faced impossible odds and asked, if not me, then who? The galaxy had learned to fear human warfare, but, more importantly, it had learned to embrace human values. Strength serving compassion. Power protecting weakness. Death choosing meaning. As Zartek watched young officers from 100 worlds train together, learning not just to fight, but why to fight, he understood the humans' greatest victory. They hadn't conquered the galaxy. They taught it to protect itself. The old admiral often told his students, "I watched humans charge into battle and understood why the galaxy fears them. But more importantly, I watched them charge into battle and understood why the galaxy loves them. Because in the end, humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their ships or their tactics or their willingness to die. It was their ability to make others understand that some things are worth living for, worth fighting for, worth dying for." And in teaching the galaxy that lesson, humanity had ensured they would never stand alone again. The stars were safer now, not because humans patrolled them, but because humanity's spirit had spread to every corner of the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, beings looked at the weak and asked themselves the question that had once belonged only to one small blue planet. If not me, then who? And on 1,000 worlds, the answer came back the same. Me. Today. Now. Always. The galaxy had learned the most dangerous truth in existence. When good beings stand together, when protectors refuse to yield, when love transforms into action, no darkness can prevail. Humanity had given the galaxy more than victory. They'd given it hope. And hope, Zartek knew, was the most powerful weapon of all.